The talk of the town is tariffs. And we're all trying to get to wrap our head around it. And we're not really sure what's going to happen. So this is the thing. Is the outcome even determined? Is it uncertain? Let's just try to learn more. How about that? This is from the Wall Street Journal, the infamous Why Economists Hate Trump's Tariff Plan. Let's hear it. Why do they hate it?
Before we get into tariffs,
the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan,
we should talk about the chicken war.
The chicken war is a clucking good story.
In post-World War II West Germany, people started eating a lot of chicken, specifically American chicken. Midway through 1962, U.S. farmers were on track to sell more than $50 million worth, $500 million in today's money.
It's a lot of
This
chicken.
made European farmers mad, so the organization that later became the European Union put a tariff on chicken. A 5-pound chicken that started as $1.60 became $2.25. Imports
No good.
quickly dropped. U.S. chicken farmers and politicians were furious.
And we thought Germany's our big market for chicken, and so if we hurt the Germans, maybe we'll get them to
Does anyone know if the EU's chicken tariff was the first tariff ever made? I doubt it, but the first one that had any severe consequence, perhaps? That would be interesting to know if the EU effed it all up from the beginning.
change their mind on chicken.
So the U.S. put a 25% tariff on trucks, like Germany's Volkswagen. And
Good
it
old
worked.
Volkswagen.
Their truck sales in the U.S. fell by half, and they never really recovered. Meanwhile, Germans paid more for their chicken, and Americans had fewer truck options. It's kind of a perfect example of what tariffs do: hurt consumers while protecting very specific industries, or attempt to get countries to change their behavior. While they haven't been a large part of trade policy in decades, former President Donald Trump wants to change that.
Some might say it's economic nationalism. I call it common sense. I call it America first.
President Trump has really sort of brought a lot of people out to think that tariffs might be something that's useful in America's economic arsenal in a way that hasn't been used in the past.
Here's how tariffs work and what Trump's proposals would do. Let's start in 2018, when President Trump put tariffs on
Washing machines. We're going to benefit our consumers, and we're going to create a lot of jobs.
Since then,
I find it funny targeting these very specific industries. It's just hilarious.
and whenever a washing machine is imported to the U.S., the company on the U.S. side doing the
It's like that goddamn washing machine. That's the one thing we need to control now.
importing pays a tariff to the U.S. government.
Their margins are pretty low. They've got to pass that price on to consumers who ultimately pay it. That's the whole point, in some sense, to reduce demand for those goods and create space for domestic producers.
After the tariffs, not only did the price of imported washing machines go up, so did the ones made in the U.S.
There's this myth out there that if we tax imports, domestic producers won't change their prices. And that's not the case. You're creating more demand for them.
So naturally,
Of
the
course.
price goes up. And it wasn't just washers. Dryers went up in price too, even though they weren't part of the tariffs.
Usually it's the case if you
I'm sorry I'm pausing already so many times, but I always think government should stay out of as much as possible. Everything they touch just ends up going wrong. There's a funny story. I don't remember where in India it was, but they were having an overflow of snakes in the area. And the government would start paying for people to capture the snakes and deliver it to them, and they'd get a payment for every snake, or every, I guess, per weight or something. What do you think happened? You think the place got rid of snakes? No. People started breeding snakes. Of course they did. They could make way more money that way. And this is what happens, right? You want to put tariffs on another nation or area of the world in order to get more domestic production, which sounds good in theory, and I agree with that in theory. Although then look what happens. Suddenly the demand is higher for, in this case, washing machines and dryers in the US, and they raise their prices because they got to keep up with demand, or they just can. And there's in some sense, I would love to hear an argument for a time when tariffs actually worked. I would love to hear that, because I could be wrong, and maybe there's a point where it made sense. And if you bring domestic production at home, is that a big enough pro against the cons? Or is it always that consumers are losing? That's the question. So if you know, write it in the comments, because I want to know.
You buy a washer, you buy a dryer. So even though dryers weren't directly affected by the tariff, they were indirectly affected by the shift in demand.
Sure.
Now, it wasn't all bad. These tariffs did
Create a lot of jobs.
about 1,800, mostly from those foreign companies like Samsung and LG opening plants in the U.S. And a study found the U.S. collected $82 million annually. But because of those price increases, it cost consumers $1.5 billion more.
That's crazy.
So they basically paid $815,000 per job.
This is a very expensive job creation program. And so that's another reason why economists don't like tariffs. They're much more cost-effective, more efficient ways of increasing employment in those industries.
These weren't the only tariffs Trump created in 2018. The big ones were on
Steel and aluminum.
Those are really designed to punish China for its transgressions of international trade rules.
Also for national security. They're used to make a lot of military equipment, but also everyday things like cars.
All the industries that use steel and have to pay the higher price, that squeezes their profit margins, and it also puts them at a competitive disadvantage against foreign producers of those same goods who don't have to pay those inflated costs for their inputs. And so a lot of studies have shown that you lose jobs, as many, if not more jobs, in those downstream industries as you gain in the upstream industries that are being protected by the tariffs.
Many studies on the 2018 tariffs found some pros, some cons. Manufacturing jobs, which were on the decline, didn't increase, but they did level out. The overall economy lost jobs, mostly in those downstream industries. And the costs of the tariffs were passed on to U.S. companies and consumers. So not great for the economy. But it did motivate U.S. companies to move out of China and made supply chains more resilient. But it didn't change much of China's behavior. And in many ways, they became more aggressive. But here's the thing. Even with all the economic downsides, a review by the Biden administration suggested Trump's tariffs should remain, and the administration should add or increase them, which they did.
Once tariffs get in place, there are two factors that sort of keep them in place for some time. First of all, there are going to be domestic interest groups that have a stake in seeing those tariffs maintained because they like the extra market share that they've gained as a result of those tariffs.
Of course.
And second of all, tariffs are a bargaining chip. So why would we sort of unilaterally get rid of these, even if there's some economic benefits, when we might use it in some negotiations down the road?
Tariffs are really hard to remove. It's why, 60 years later, there's still a 25% tariff on trucks, even though U.S. chicken farmers no longer care about selling in Europe.
So we're still living with the legacy of the chicken war. So that's sort of another lesson of history, is you have to be careful about imposing these tariffs because you think you're doing it for short-term strategic reasons or you're just helping out this industry temporarily, but they can last for decade upon decade upon decade.
Tariff policy is kind of old. Even by the chicken war, they were only imposed on around 7% of U.S. imports. Trump's plan for a second term is to bring them back dramatically.
This is the policy that built this country, and this is the policy that will save our country.
He's proposing a 60% tariff on everything from China, and a 10 or even 20% on every import from every other country.
Countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world.
I don't know how are they paying back if the cost ends up going to the consumer or simply less goods are sold to the U.S. Someone explain that to me.
Multiple independent studies looked at the possible effects. One found it would cost the average American household $1,700 from higher prices. Another found it could cost more than 684,000 jobs.
That's a lot of jobs.
And they don't factor in how domestic goods might get more expensive or retaliatory tariffs from other countries.
They're not going to take this lying down. They're not going to change their behavior in some way to appease the administration that imposes such tariffs. They're going to retaliate. So not only will U.S. imports shrink, but U.S. exports will shrink as well.
Trump wants to use these tariffs as a revenue stream for the U.S. to pay for tax cuts.
As tariffs on foreign countries go up, taxes on American workers and families come down.
Studies found his proposal would likely bring in around $250 billion per year, about 5% of what the federal government currently brings in with taxes. So if tariffs are harmful, always harmful even to the economy. Why is Trump so focused on them? In the last 20 years, China has gotten aggressive, investing in manufacturing to become the world's largest exporter. Even today, they invest more than any other country.
This is where I see the issue as well. Like, what do you do as the US? You have a country which makes goods at a fraction of the cost that you can produce in the US, and they're all coming in here. I mean, what's Amazon? It's literally just China. If you know anything about Amazon, you know most goods on Amazon are probably just Chinese goods or goods that have been imported from other countries in general. And it's not sustainable for the US to not produce in its own country. It's supposed to produce its own goods and its own services and so forth. It does in some sense. I'm not saying nothing is produced here, but I get the initial knee-jerk response to do something about it when there's a competitor on a high level doing something about it, you know?
It has let
Yeah.
them export things like steel and aluminum at below market values. That, coupled with numerous trade rule violations,
Allowed President Trump to really restart the whole discussion about using tariffs to achieve certain objectives, such as punishing other countries, and the Biden administration has just continued that. So the whole environment has really changed from 20 years ago, when trade policy was pretty quiet business, and now we're talking about industrial policy, tariffs, subsidies, and all these different interventions because the whole global and geopolitical environment has changed quite dramatically.
and it would change even more dramatically with Trump's proposed tariff plan. In the short run, we know the economy will suffer. In the long run, no one really knows. Will it be a war between the US and the rest of the world, or the Western world against China? Trump wants to play a game of chicken to find out.
Yeah, it's a great video, great summary. Unless there's missing something or something I could look. I'm not knowledgeable on this subject. All I see is that at the moment, short-term wise, it's not a good thing, at least for the cost of the average consumer. Whether it's a good thing for the US in general is to be seen. You would hope so, of course, if you live in the US, obviously. But what is the case here? Is it simply a game of uncertainty? And should government just let off a bit? I don't know, because you can't have all these goods coming in for a fraction of the cost. In the end, to me, it's always monetary policy. The dollar shouldn't be losing so much value. There shouldn't be so much printing. And that destroys everything, which you come to a point where you need to start implementing strategies like this. Let's hear what more intelligent people have to say. Can I close this? Well, beware politicians peddling simplistic solutions to complex problems. Sure. Why don't people know how tariffs work? I'm here in Argentina, and you want to know how much a bottle of imported shampoo generally costs? $20 to $30. And some items don't have many competitors, so the Argentinian products get away with also increasing their prices. This is what I was going to say. You know, the U.S. stands for free trade, at least that's what they say. And are tariffs not a form of restricting free trade? It becomes a bit monopolistic, right? Still, could you consider it America first because it's for the benefit of American companies? Perhaps. But it's confusing, right? Because the balance goes away from the American consumer. So maybe the business might be having more market share, might be making more money, perhaps. But I think these tariffs would make more sense if they succeed and you can take down income tax or other taxes, perhaps, so that it can balance out and you focus on goods made in the US. Perhaps that would make maybe more sense. That's a funny one. In all honesty, it actually doesn't matter who on earth pays the tariff, whether it be the manufacturer or the importer, because at the end of the day, only one person will pay, the consumer. You see, this is the thing. A business has a bottom line they must honor or they're going to go bankrupt. And what do when they got to pay an X amount extra of dollars? They're going to pass it on. The price just increases. Economists hate it because they're not stupid. All right. Trump said China paid the tariffs, but in reality, American consumers paid. That's thinking about hurting China first, not benefiting American first. Oh my. In the end, who lost the trade war? Well, we don't know. I wanted to share, there's 2 other videos you can watch if you'd like to know more about this. This one is How to Win a Trade War by How Money Works. I'll put it in the description as well. There's a comment here that's good. After years of watching this channel, I realized nobody knows how money works. It's just the historic practice of F around and find out on repeat. You know what? That's not that wrong, I'll be honest. The other one is this one. Can tariffs actually work from economics explained? Wow, I need to wake up today, man. This one. 640, this is the critical bit. The tariffs establish a new price baseline, even for domestic goods in that category. Even if the tariff goes away, the price has been permanently raised. I think this is a good argument for everything after COVID as well. Look how everything has increased. And maybe there's a good reason. The argument is, can it even be lowered? Perhaps, but now the price has been so raised that it's difficult to suddenly lower everything. The cost of everything has increased, and so it must remain there in some sense. It's a difficult topic, for sure. If you'd want to watch these videos and learn more for yourself, I suggest it, especially if you live in the US. These things are happening in your daily life. Why not try to understand a little bit? Understand, will it make it worse for you or better? Are you a business owner where it helps you? Or are you a consumer where it might make your daily life worse? How do you plan for it? And if you know anything about this, any good links you'd like to send me so I can educate myself and perhaps whoever watches more, send it my way, please.